I spent half a year of my life making a Minecraft video. It's about this city I built that was fully designed down to the block, including interiors, lore, area names, an interactive scavenger hunt, and more. People enjoyed it way more than I thought they would, so in this video I'm going to show you how I made it and share some of my process. There's so much to cover, and I'll be answering some of the major questions you guys had, plus I'll try out the build with the Distant Horizons mod for the first time at the end. To make it easier, I'm going to split the video up into 3 parts: the designing of the city, the building of it in Minecraft, and how I made the video. And before getting too far, I have to give a huge thank you to everyone that watched and interacted with this video. The response has been amazing and unexpected. I've had so much fun reading everyone's comments, and I'm super motivated to make even better builds for you guys in the future. Now let's start at the beginning. Even before I started designing, I had reevaluated my channel and builds a little bit and decided that I wanted to create the best possible thing I could with no timeline at all, spend however long I needed to make the best build and the best video that I possibly could. This ended up being really difficult because when you're 4 months into a project without even starting the editing and instead trying to decide on some mundane detail like what color a door should be, it's pretty easy to get discouraged. But I knew that if I just stuck to the plan and remembered my original goal, then it would be worth it in the end. And the style I went with was solarpunk, which is focused on eco-friendly, positive, futuristic designs. So once the general direction of the build was decided, I had a brainstorm session that I like to call snowballing, which basically consists of me making a drink, opening a Word document, and letting my mind wander. It's this phase that I think of ideas about the lore, the name of the city, goals that I want the build to accomplish, that sort of thing. It's really just a big brainstorming session, usually alongside creating a Pinterest board of inspiration. Once I had some pretty solid ideas for the build, I started working on what's known in architecture as the program. This is just a detailed list of the functions and spaces that a design should have. So for this build, the program consisted of types of buildings, paths, interior functions, outdoor things, details, districts, skyscrapers, everything I thought the city should include. After having a good idea of the program, it was finally time to start designing and thinking about the aesthetics. I sketched out some ideas that I had for important buildings like some skyscrapers, and whoops, that's the build I'm currently working on. How did that get there? Eventually I got tired of writing and sketching things and taking notes and decided it was time to actually start designing some things. I started with the terrain so that I could have a base to work with when designing. I wanted the terrain to have a lush, tropical feel. I was imagining like palm trees and beaches because that just seemed like it aligned with the good vibes of solarpunk. I also wanted the mountains to form a sort of enclosure around the city, which would help make it feel a bit more cozy. And so I tried to mimic these vein-like hills in Hawaii using the Axiom mod. First, I drew the general shape of the island and made a flat base. Then I added the mountains using the elevation tool, made them look more natural with the slope tool, added these veiny things with the elevation tool again, painted it, added some texture, and this is how it turned out. Probably went a little bit overboard with the texturing, but generally I was pretty happy with it. Once I was happy with the terrain, I used Mineways to create an OBJ file that I could bring into my 3D modeling software, Rhino. Working in a software like Rhino is super nice because it allowed me to design at a much faster pace and easily try out different options and configurations. All that said, using a 3D modeler is by no means a requirement to build something like this. It's just my preferred method and a software that I can work more efficiently in. If you're interested in designing some large, elaborate build like this in Minecraft, I really can't recommend Axiom mod enough. It gives you the ability to navigate around Minecraft as if it were a 3D software. You can have saved views and manipulate large amounts of blocks super quickly and easily. I don't even think I know the full extent of what you can do with this mod, so it's definitely worth learning if you're wanting to get into this sort of thing. And if you're really set on wanting to learn a 3D software for designing, you could give Blender a try. It's a free software, but it's super professional and you can do a ton of stuff with Blender. When designing something from scratch, I tend to start in plan view, which is just top-down view, because it's a lot easier to start designing in 2 dimensions instead of diving straight into 3D. And at the beginning of the design process, it was pretty easy to get overwhelmed when I started thinking of everything I still needed to do. But there's this quote that I like from Henry Ford that's something like, "Nothing is that difficult if you break it up into smaller parts." And that actually applies to a lot of things in life, but especially building large things in Minecraft. So whenever I was overwhelmed with designing the entire city, I would just keep breaking things down into smaller, more manageable tasks. And that's kind of how I went about designing the master plan, was just dividing the entire island with 2 major pathways that intersected at the center, which started to define districts. Then dividing those districts into major blocks with some pathways in between. And once I did that, everything started to become much easier. I was able to start dropping labels onto the site where I thought things from the program should go, like the skyscrapers should be near the center of the island next to the central hub to make them more accessible, and the more industrial areas should be along the coasts so they can have imports and exports. Placing the reservoir in an area with a high elevation so that it could have some water pressure, like a water tower, things like that. After that, it was just about modeling some of the larger ideas that I had sketched out, mainly for big infrastructural things like the perimeter rail or the aqueduct, plus the high-rises, which I'll get into each of their designs more later. So I ended up spending about a month just designing this in Rhino. Around this time, I was getting super eager to jump into Minecraft and start building. So that's what I did. For me, since I designed it in Rhino, I was able to use the method I made and showed in this video to get the massings into Minecraft. Even though this was super helpful for setting the scale and shape of some of the buildings, you can see that most of them came out pretty rough and needed a lot of work to turn them into anything usable. If I didn't have this software or method, I would still 100% start by designing something that looks like this in Minecraft as big colored boxes. I think this is a crucial step for designing something that's complex and holistic with a lot of moving parts, because it allows you to find the right building sizes, proportions, and distances from each other. And since they're just massings, simple boxes, they're easy to manipulate and change if you don't like something. Once I had the major elements of the city in place and had done all of the legwork of developing the backstory and creating a detailed list of all of the needed areas, then it was just about designing everything at a human scale and bringing it to life in Minecraft. I started first by building a bunch of houses in the style that I had imagined, which was sort of like a New Orleans Creole vibe, mixed with some kind of beach house aesthetic, I guess. I knew they needed to be colorful, friendly looking, appear to be lived in with some of the details. And I also made this group roughly the same dimensions, like same height and width, because I knew I wanted to eventually use them as building blocks, like use the houses themselves as building blocks for a larger neighborhood chunk, like this. After that, I made some bigger houses that could occupy some of the larger, more prominent sites on the island. I tried to keep them in the same sort of whimsical style with some details added to make them feel a little bit more futuristic, maybe, hopefully. I won't get too in the weeds about how to be a good builder at this scale because I'm still learning a lot and there's so much good content out there already on how to improve at building. My friend The Mango is a super talented builder and has a lot of videos of him building and explaining his thought process throughout. I've also found some of Shovel 241's older tutorial videos to be pretty instructive, so check those out if you want, but the best way to get better is just to build a lot, so keep practicing, and you can use mods like World Edit or Axiom to make it quicker and easier on yourself. This is something that a lot of creators and professional builders do, which is to build on a flat surface, kind of like a blank canvas, and then use World Edit to copy and paste the builds around. And that's what I did for these smaller houses, building details, furniture, landscaping, and trees, that sort of thing. Once I had most of the smaller stuff built, I moved on to the larger buildings. I ended up giving each one its own character because I had so many ideas for the high rises that I wanted to try out that would hopefully help capture the style of solar punk. Voxel Heights took a long time, but it's definitely one of my favorites. This person in the comments nailed it. It was intended to be a collection of individual homes, each with their own unique character, but still making up one larger connected community inside of the shell of some old corporate high-rise type building. And I thought this could be a really beautiful blend between bottom-up and top-down design. So bottom-up because there's a lot of individuality in terms of the character of each family's home, and top down in the sense that they're all sort of following some order inside of this larger shell that gives it hierarchy. And this blend between bottom up and top down was kind of a recurring theme in the city design. This building was inspired by garbage. Let me explain. I do this thing with my gum wrappers sometimes where I play with it and make little shapes with it. And so I made something that looked kind of like this. And here is a larger mock-up that I made out of aluminum foil. And yeah, I just thought it was a really cool shape. I thought it kind of had a little bit of biophilic inspiration. You know, it reminded me of like some kind of DNA strand or like a leaf or something. So designed the form in Rhino and then used that as the base form in Minecraft, and then just added some windows and turned it into an apartment building. The roof of the pier was inspired by some of these Fry Auto models that he made out of bubbles and bubble films. Fry Auto was an amazing German architect that actually taught in St. Louis, where I'm from, and was known for these beautiful, elegant tensile structures. And I really enjoyed these shapes, and it seemed to make sense to use them here in a way where they could intertwine with some of the industrial elements in the area. Lumen Spire. This was the largest building in the city and also took a long time to figure out, mainly because the weird shape didn't really lend itself to a good way of dividing the building and making it work internally. I ended up dividing it into large chunks that I could turn into big apartment suites and a library at the bottom. The main thing I was trying to accomplish with this building shape was to give it a bold presence, because I knew it was going to be the largest building on the island, and so I wanted to give it the appearance of something that felt important, but not in an obnoxious look at me kind of way. The Phoenix statue is the largest organic build that I've ever made, and I'm really happy with how it turned out, but I have to admit, I did not do it entirely by hand. I modeled something in Rhino first to get it started, then I brought that into Minecraft and finished it from there. Even using a 3D software and mods to build this, it still took forever, but it gave me so much appreciation for the creators that do these kind of builds regularly and way better and bigger than the one you see here. I think it looks cool, But actually my favorite thing about it is the role that it plays in the scavenger hunt, which unfortunately I can't give away. This one is where I found out why nobody makes pentagonal buildings in Minecraft. One of the final things I did while building is something I noticed that our good friend Bob Ross does as well. And this was just creating little stories around the buildings and areas in my head while designing them to help them come to life a little bit. For example, in this location, I had always imagined that maybe one of these buildings has some kind of little school in it, and so I figured that the kids would need some fun area to play after school. So I made this small watering hole that flows down from the aqueduct, or how this valley below the Phoenix statue felt a little bit secluded from the city in a good way. It felt kind of peaceful here. And so I thought that it would make a good place for an orchard where maybe some of the citizens can come here and reflect on their day and enjoy some peace and quiet a little bit. I think that even though some of these kinds of areas weren't explicitly designed with these stories in mind, it still helped to breathe some life into the world and make it a bit more interesting. I should also mention that I was not super thrilled with how everything came out. In hindsight, I would have spent a bit more time to make everything feel a bit more unified and cohesive, like this building, for example. I don't even think I included this in the time lapse because I just wasn't that happy with it. And the bank, which has a cool interior, but the form of it was a bit rushed since it was one of the last buildings I worked on. So few random things here and there that I would have done differently, but they're all just learning opportunities that I can take with me into the next build. Even though the build was finished, there was still a lot of work I had to do to create the time-lapse and the video. I got a ton of comments from people asking how I make the time-lapse. I did not come up with this method, but I've seen other creators do it all the time. It's a little bit time-consuming to make, but I figured it was necessary so that I could have the build show up in a way that made sense with the story and would make it a little bit easier to follow along. So just to demonstrate the process really quick, using World Edit, you can create a brush of air, like that, and then just start deleting everything. So, like I said, pretty time consuming, so you do that a bunch of times until it's gone, and then reverse the footage in post, and it looks like you're building it. So that's how I did that. Oh, and actually the most important step of this is the first step, and that's to create a copy of the world. Otherwise, you would just be deleting everything you made, and that would be a major bummer. Once I recorded all of the footage for the time-lapse, I had to do the very painful process of going into each recording file in replay mod. There were 110, and setting the camera paths for the time-lapse footage. There were two main things I tried to keep in mind while doing this. The first thing was to make sure that I was getting the angles and the views that clearly capture the design of the build, especially if there was something specific that I knew I was going to talk about or highlight. I would make sure to focus on that a little bit. And then the second thing was just to get shots that look nice and eye-appealing. That might go without saying. And then I made sure to have some B-roll footage and then hit render. And a pro tip, you can actually batch render in replay mod. So you can set the camera path and then click out of the file and select all of them and render them all at the same time. So you could do it like overnight or something instead of doing it one at a time, and save yourself some time that way. This is the fake city that you see at the beginning of the video. I know that cities don't look this lame in real life. I was just trying to show something that would contrast the vibrant and eclectic city that I would be showing later. So please don't hate me for this bad depiction of cities. This is the city I used for the next shot, which is literally just Tentacle Acres from SpongeBob. This is like the most depressing city ever. Really depressing. This guy's pissed. I thought it would be a good idea to start the build with the surrounding perimeter rail because I thought it would help the viewer get oriented to the site a little bit, as well as show off the scale of the build and how large the island is. Starting off with that and then building the monorails next to do a similar thing to divide the island and make it a bit more clear and easy to follow along with the smaller builds after that. And after that, it was really just about trying to tell the story through the build, so ordering it chronologically to how it could have happened. So, for example, starting with a small community that grows and starts building larger buildings and more complex buildings, and then finishing with the largest buildings, the skyscrapers. Kind of to that same point, one thing I've learned both from making videos and also through my day job as a designer is the importance of clarity. Because in architecture, you're explaining these designs and schemes which can sometimes be pretty complicated and that you're probably very familiar with since you created them or helped create them, but you're sharing them with somebody that has never seen them before. So in architecture, you're sharing with a client. On YouTube, you're sharing with the viewer. So it was helpful for me to keep that in mind while making the video, which led me to making this little map that I could show in the corner of the screen that would have sections appear as I built them. The last main thing I did for the video portion is compile a bunch of music that fits the vibe of the build, because music in a time-lapse of this style is obviously pretty important and can play a big role in the flow of the video and just generally how it feels. And Epidemic Sound is really cool. It has a ton of songs and gives you the option to download individual stems, like only the bass or the drums or the melody, for example, which is cool because it gave me a few more options for making the music composition fit with whatever was happening on the screen. Okay, so this is the Distant Horizons mod, and for those that don't know, Distant Horizons is a mod that reduces the level of detail of farther away chunks, which makes them easier to render. And this is pretty insane what's on the screen right now, because those distant hills are literally like 2,000 blocks away. So to be able to see those is pretty crazy. And just being able to see that far away terrain makes it feel so much more realistic instead of just having the typical border fog. These are complementary unbound shaders, by the way. It's my first time using these. Normally I use complementary reimagined, but I really like the clouds on these. Like the sky looks real. That's crazy. Let me try different lighting. Yeah, that's nice. Some people said they'd rather just see the actual build process instead of this kind of fake time-lapse thing, which I respect, but I decided not to do that because it was, as you saw in this video, a super messy process. And plus, I had always planned on making this behind-the-scenes video anyway. I also got a lot of people telling me I should use the Create mod, which is actually a great idea because it would just add to the detail and immersivity of the build. However, for me, that seems like it would be a can of worms that I'm not sure if I want to get into. Even though I'm sure it could do some cool, amazing things, I think I'd rather just focus more on design and not get too caught up in the intricacies like that. That said, if any of you guys are creators that use the Create mod and want to mess around with some stuff on this build, let me know, and maybe I could get you a download. I'm not being sarcastic at all when I say these comments are actually my favorite, because it blows my mind the tiny details that people catch and how attentive some of the viewers are, and it just makes me happy that people like that are watching my videos. Without comments like these, I never would have built this thing in the first place, because I never would have known that people notice or care about these little things. that I might otherwise not worry about. But clearly you guys do care, and so I'll just keep striving to make even better builds for you. Thank you guys so much for watching and supporting the channel, and make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss the build I'm currently working on, because it's going to be crazy. Okay, thank you, bye.